Good afternoon, everyone. We are beginning the Community Improvement Plan Evaluation Committee meeting at 4:06, Mary. This afternoon, we've got quite an agenda, and we've got three people from Dillon Consulting with us, Amy, Rory, and Megan. And we'll have a little report from them later and a bit of a discussion. Okay, I'm going to read the Land Acknowledgement. On June the 8th, 2022, we acknowledge that this sacred land on which Smiths Falls is now located has been a site of human activity for over 10,000 years and is rich in Indigenous history. This land is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation. We are grateful to the Algonquin ancestors who cared for the land and water in order that we might meet here today. We are also grateful to the Algonquin people for their contribution to the making of the Rideau Canal, which runs through Smiths Falls. We are mindful of broken covenants and the need to reconcile with all our relations. Together, may we care for this land and each other, drawing on the strength of our mutual history of nation building through peace and friendship, being mindful of generations to come. Okay. I'm assuming you've all seen the agenda, and I'd like someone to make a motion to approve the agenda for today. Karen, thank you. And Dorothy seconded. All those in favor? Okay, passed. Adoption of the minutes. Hopefully you've read the minutes from Wednesday, May the 25th, which was our last meeting. And I'd like a motion to accept the minutes. Julia, thank you. And a seconder. Chris, Samir, thank you. All those in favor? Any changes to those minutes? Issues? No. Okay, we will continue on. Disclosure of monetary interest. Is there any disclosure of monetary interest? None. Okay, acknowledged as none, and we will proceed to item number 6. Draft issues and options report, Community Improvement Program policy review. So we've got our Dillon Consulting Company with us today, 3 members from the company, and I am going to pass it over to one of you, whoever would like to take this forward. Any hands up? Rory.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I'm very pleased to join you at this kind of important turning point as it relates to the Smiths Falls Community Improvement Plan. The issues and options report represents a bit of a culmination of some background research, and it also begins to point us in some forward-looking direction. So we're very excited to bring things to you at this particular time for a conversation that will hopefully, charge us with further direction about how to, successfully complete the work of the CIP. Joined with me today is Amy Greenberg, our planner, urban designer, as well as Megan Reddy, our other planner. And I'm actually going to ask Amy to speak to the issues and options report, and provide the committee an opportunity to hear briefly from us for each section, and then pause for any questions or feedback. And hopefully that provides an opportunity for both a bit of a presentation of what we've learned thus far, and an opportunity to continue to build the knowledge base. Amy, how about I turn it over to you?
Thanks, Rory. Just before I carry on, Mary, will I have the power to share my screen?
We can't hear you, Mary.
You should, yes, sorry.
Yes?
I'm muted. Yes, you should be.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. I figured, I know we sent it to you last week, so you should have it in your possession, but just for simplicity's sake, I can get it up on the screen. Okay. See if I can have everybody in view again, because it always seems to minimize everything else when I share my screen. So first and foremost, thank you for having us today. I wanted to give you a brief overview of what we had done to get to this point. As Rory had said, we did some background research, as well as engaged with the public and some key stakeholders that were suggested by the town, to essentially get a sense of what is going on the ground in Smiths Falls and what can we learn from that to shape a community improvement plan that builds on the existing one, but also adds in a piece around attainable housing. So on that note, I will just quickly go through. So the introduction section gives that lowdown on what we have done so far and the work that has been done to date to get it to this point. And on that note, the main focus areas for the CIP is Brownfield development, downtown and waterfront area revitalization. So that includes the existing piece of facade, landscape, and signage improvements, but it also adds that layer of universal accessibility. So that means internal and external improvements that allow for barrier-free design. So regardless of your age, physical ability, or stature. And then that last extra piece is attainable housing. So I'm going to skip over just again, for context of where we are in the project, we've done that background review. We've summarized everything in this interim report, the issues and options report. So based on this conversation today, as well as everything we've learned that's in this report, it'll help us to start shaping the actual community improvement plan, or CIP, as well as the municipal leadership strategy, which for clarity, the municipal leadership strategy is essentially town-led initiatives on infrastructure, the streetscape, public areas, whatever it may be, to help revitalize the community from the town's perspective.
Amy, can I ask you a question? And it was a question that Chris McGuire asked me earlier. I noticed there's nothing regarding program 2 in here. Did the contract include program 1 and 2, or just program 1?
The contract would be to look at that existing CIP and update it. So if we missed program 2, we can make sure that it's in the draft CIP.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So the way this document was organized is we identified a series of issues, but from those issues, opportunities and gaps to fill or address. So again, we had chatted with a series of stakeholders. We held a public information center, essentially providing a project overview, and we asked input from the public around the eligibility boundaries, as well as eligibility criteria for the CIP programs. So built into that, we found several themes that were discussed that will help to inform the eligibility criteria for the CIP, some of which are displayed on the screen for you. And as well, we also looked at existing CIPs with similar programs in terms of best practices and what we could learn from other municipalities of a similar size and nature doing similar things. Before I move on, do we have any questions so far?
Amy, I see on the very first page, you're saying attainable housing where a household is spending no more than 30% of their gross income on housing costs. I think the word's supposed to be excluding utilities, not including utilities, but I think there's a typo there.
Quite possible. So thanks, Chris, for drawing that to my attention.
No, that's the definition.
It is excluding. It is usually excluding utilities, so that must be a typo.
Yeah.
Thanks for pointing that out. So essentially, as part of the best practice review, we looked at the Belleville CIP, which had an attainable housing component, the Coburg CIP, as well as the Carleton Place CIP, which is comparable in terms of its size as well. And we learned which financial incentive programs they had across all of them that were similar. And so in terms of opportunities and gaps, we looked at the opportunities and gaps for those three main focus areas, again, which is attainable housing, brownfield redevelopment, and downtown and waterfront revitalization with that accessibility component. From these opportunities and gaps, they also helped to inform that municipal leadership strategy. So rather than reading point by point, I can give you the Coles notes of these opportunities. So for attainable housing, there is a unanimous agreement that there is a need for it across the town, and that a CIP would be a very good mechanism to help support it and encourage its development. The possible innovations in terms of financial incentives are waiving development fees or pre-zoning specific sites, and so on and so forth. And also that something that came out of this was the opportunity to create an affordable housing advisory committee, which would actually build on the mayor's task force of affordable housing, and would keep things moving forward in an organized way. Some gaps. Yes, part of the challenge is if the financial incentives aren't motivating enough, if you will, for a lack of a better word, we're worried that people may not apply for it if they feel it's not worth their while.
Amy, did you have a feel for how large that incentive should be? So as I was going through this report, finances were mentioned quite a few times. And I think, what does that mean for the town and the council as to funds that have to be put on the table to make this really move forward, whether it's the attainable housing or the downtown CIP? Like when I read through it, that came up a lot. So I'm just wondering if you have a feel for that as to what should be on the table to make it significant.
It's actually part of the methodology. So at this point, these are just preliminary recommendations based on what other municipalities have done and what has worked so far. But the next step will be to do an actual analysis to figure out what those numbers may be. Rory, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I can fill in based on some work that we've been doing in other municipalities and conversations we've been having with developers. And as it relates to a developer that's going to build an apartment building, we can basically put them in two camps. There are those that are specialized builders of affordable housing. They understand that that is a market product. They're involved in doing that. They know how to get the CMHC funding. And if a municipality has a community improvement plan, their view is that's just gravy for them, because it allows them to receive an incentive of some kind that essentially supports the bottom line of their particular project. Now, when you talk about market housing developers, it's a totally different story. Their perspective and the conversations we've had are very clear. What they say is, Rory, Amy, Megan, why the heck would I apply for a program and give somebody an affordable housing rate on this housing development when I can just charge regular rate? So like, what's in it for me? And what we've learned through the course of those conversations is that for this to really work with market developers of housing, to then be able to put affordable rental rates out there, is somehow the mathematics have to work in such a way that this becomes a form of a quasi-rent subsidy. So for example, if that developer says to me, Rory, I can rent a one bedroom for $1,600, and you're telling me the affordable housing rate is $1,100, where am I going to make up that $500 from per month on that unit? And show me how your math works in your CIP so that I'm not taking a big hit on my rent. And through the course of the financial analysis that Amy's alluded to, we're going to calibrate the affordable market rates for Smiths Falls, and then we're going to run some financial models to see what we can do about building in the appropriate kind of parameters around the various incentive programs to try to keep things in balance. Because if it isn't well calibrated, there won't be any take up, especially since this is really a voluntary attainable housing program. Like you're offering it to encourage people to do it, but it's totally optional for them to participate.
Sorry,
Okay,
Roy, how are you
thank
going
you.
to obtain this information on rental rates? Like nobody else has been able to in 10 years here. If you ask the County of Lanark what the rental rate is or what's affordable rate. Nobody has a clue in Smith Falls at all, or most of the municipalities around us. I'm very interested to see how you would attain, how you will get to that.
Yeah, we'll start down the customary path that we've always done. We usually reach out to those offering rental units, and when we inquire about rental rates, we actually talk to real estate agents. Some of them do facilitate rentals, and we ask them what the going rates are and what the market will bear. We do have access to income data, and we do calculations against gross income to determine that 30% threshold, and then from there we're able to then look at these differentials between what the market rate is, what the affordable housing rate could be or should be, and what's necessary to make up the difference. We actually look forward to completing that exercise and bringing it to a future conversation. I'm sure everyone will be very much interested in looking at those numbers and the analysis and having a further conversation about it.
I think it'll be very sobering for sure. There's no question about it. There's people paying $600 that have been in an apartment for 300 or for 30 years. And there's people that are just moving into $25,000 to $3,000 apartments. So I don't envy your task.
Okay, thank you very much, Rory. I just mentioned to the rest of the committee, I can't see everybody on my screen. So if you have something that you want to add or a question that you have, just please jump right in there.
Or I do have a question. It's Janet. I don't know if you can see me on your screen. I was just curious. I was just curious as to what the criteria were for the three comparing municipalities, because the closest in our population is twice the size of Smith Falls. So you're not looking at smaller municipalities like Smith Falls. So to me, it's not really comparing apples to apples as far as the comparators.
Yeah, it is actually very difficult in particular to find municipalities that have done affordable housing CIPs, which was really a key focus of this particular exercise, because it's actually fairly new on the landscape in Ontario. Interestingly enough, I just got a call from the Director of Planning in Sault Ste. Marie who said, Rory, I want to do an affordable housing CIP. And he's kind of getting in line a bunch of other municipalities that have been doing this. Barrie recently did one. They're quite larger size community. Welland is in the process of working on one. Midland as well. Like right now, we are seeing a number of communities starting to pick it up, and this is again relatively new. Folks have not been thinking about this, but given the housing crisis, they are moving towards these CIPs.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, back to you.
Thanks, Herb. Opportunities and gaps for downtown and waterfront revitalization. I also want to preface that I could go through all of these points, but I would like to get them to the meat of the conversation, which is the preliminary recommendations on the financial incentives, but this is still worthwhile as well. So we noticed that there has been some positive responses towards the existing CIP program, specifically the facade improvement piece. And we have heard from some stakeholders that they have had positive experiences with the application process itself as well. One of the main opportunities I wanted to bring up was interest that we had heard from previous applicants on being able to provide accessibility related improvements to their buildings as well. So this wouldn't necessarily be limited to downtown and waterfront revitalization financial incentives, but there is an opportunity to do an accessibility joint application or a top up, where if you were to apply for funding for facade improvements and for accessibility improvements, there would be a streamlined mechanism to do so. So there is an opportunity for that. We also noticed in terms of gaps, though, that when it came to figuring out how to redesign their facade, it was difficult to find something that, for a lack of a better word, suited the area without creating visual conflict, if you will. So there, in that sense, is an opportunity to come up with something like urban design guidelines that respects the local heritage, but still has an opportunity to come up with like a modernized design as well. And then for brownfield redevelopment,
Amy, before we go on to brownfield, we do have guidelines for the downtown. Were people saying that that's not enough? I noticed in one point here, you talk about, you know, they want more guidelines, signed bylaws and things that would encourage them to do something. And then further down, they talk about they would like it less structured. They want more diversity downtown to make it more attractive. And I'm just wondering if that's kind of a dichotomy of perspectives when we get it on paper.
Definitely a dichotomy of perspectives. I think the main thing was when they would bring ideas to the forefront. I think there was just some subjectivity in terms of what was wanted, and I think there were just some discrepancies in that area. So I think maybe it is a matter of reevaluating the guidelines rather than creating completely new ones.
I think that's a byproduct of Zoom meetings and everything else, though, where they could actually, the general public is able, we can sit around the council or around the table in the council chambers and have a very meaningful discussion face to face. And when you get onto these Zoom meetings, everybody dwells on every word that's said, rather than you can learn a lot from a person's body language. So unfortunately, these Zoom meetings, I don't think helps our committee.
I agree. Sorry, Amy.
No, that's okay. That's okay. Just trying to figure out the best ones to bring up, but with brownfield sites, because there is often nothing on them, or at the very least a need to redo anything that's on the land, there is a chance to do things like provide new public spaces for the community, or build affordable housing developments. But the challenges with that, and with any brownfield rehabilitation or remediation, is the cost associated with doing so. And then there's the risk that they being landowners may choose to sit on that land and wait until it appreciates in value. And so they may not do anything and not even bother apply for that funding. And then those lands remain vacant and unused. Very quick goals notes of the gaps and opportunities for those focus areas. So before we move on to these financial incentive strategies that we're recommending, preliminary recommendations, do we have any other questions?
I think Julia's hand is up, Amy.
Oh, I do. Oh, hi, Julia.
Okay, so you're waving
Hi.
there.
Sorry, I may have jumped ahead. Recommendations and financial incentive strategy. Go ahead. I have some comments on this section.
Yeah, okay. So on the screen right now, we have 5 options for the attainable housing incentives, one of which is that accessibility top-up, or that joint application that I had talked about, where if you are providing attainable housing and you are seeking funding for that, you can also apply for that accessibility funding if you are providing accessible features to that building that you're adding. So there are different tools that a CIP can implement or use to increase those incentives and make it a bit more worthwhile for people to apply. So an example is covering your development charges or your building permit fees, or tax increment financing as you go, which Rory, do you mind just quickly giving a definition of that?
Yeah, happy to do that. If the committee is not familiar with the concept of tax increment financing, it is a mechanism by which we recognize that after a property is developed or redeveloped, it accrues value and it gets reassessed. And through that reassessment, then the municipality has the ability to generate additional property tax revenue off of that particular development. And that becomes a cost, an ongoing cost to the developer, or the owner. So through tax increment financing, the way that it works is you establish essentially the base taxes of the property, essentially the day before it gets reassessed, and then you make a determination as to how much of the additional tax increase you choose to give back to them as an incentive. In the way that we've kind of got this as a preliminary recommendation, we're saying 100% of the taxes over a period of 10 years. So to provide a simple example, say a property as of today is assessed and they pay taxes to the town of Smiths Falls in the order of $10,000. So that's the floor amount. Now, if that property is redeveloped, their tax bill will go up to $90,000. The increment is the space between those two numbers, the increment being $80,000 of additional taxes. Under a 100% scheme, they would not have to pay the $80,000 in the end. What they would do is they would actually, through the course of the scheme, receive a rebate later on. And then essentially they're back to essentially having paid $10,000. And then over the course of 10 years, obviously that adds up quite a bit to an incentive and can mean a great deal to the bottom line of that particular project. It makes it more feasible and financially viable. And that's why tax increment has been used widely across the United States and Canada as a means of incentivizing specific types of development, in particular the things that the municipality very much wants to see happen because it is such a powerful incentive.
Basically the same concept we used for the Rito Hotel when we discussed that.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Rory.
So wait, Carl, just a reminder, I see your hand there. Irv can't see everyone on his screen, so if you have a question, you got to jump in.
I'll jump in whenever we're at the jumping in time.
Please jump in anytime.
Sure. I'm just looking at the second unit grant, and I see that's popping up in a lot of municipalities, and I'm interested in your feedback on how much uptake traditionally there has been in $5,000, because from what I've seen, that's a fairly small amount to cover off the cost of creating that second unit. And in your experience, would you be recommending that $5,000 be tagged with a requirement that the second unit be affordable, or simply no strings attached? And would that impact the uptake on the second unit?
I'm happy to speak to that one, Carl. So the reason why the threshold here is set relatively low is because it is a no strings attached type approach. It assumes that, typically speaking, not always, but typically speaking, a second unit, it can be a more modest dwelling to the main dwelling, would offer a reasonable rental rate to an individual or a family hoping to occupy that unit. So since we're not tying you to something that is registered on title that mandates the homeowner to maintain it as an affordable housing unit, we're offering a very modest allowance. We recognize that if you suggest to a homeowner that they have to go through a very extensive rigmarole to be able to access funding, they're just not going to bother. And so it becomes a bit of a pointless exercise to have a very high threshold and a series of administrative hurdles for an individual homeowner. So that's why in this particular circumstance, we're starting out with a suggested flexible approach and a very low threshold. As part of this exercise, all of this is up for further kind of dialogue and debate. So we look forward to that. I was actually in touch with staff in another municipality. They said that there hasn't been a lot of take up on the second unit. There has been an interest in the tax increment, and we're talking about them, building a promotional strategy around the second unit grant. One of the tactics is trying to actually promote it at new home sales centers and include it in offer packages. So, prospective buyers and for a new home recognize that there's an opportunity for a second unit to be built, and there's an opportunity for them to receive an incentive from the municipality for doing so. So, hope to have a few more of those conversations with that other jurisdiction. Here in Smiths Falls, we have an opportunity to calibrate this, for the needs of the community.
I think that
Go ahead, Carl.
Well, I think that that hits nail on the head. And one of the things that the challenges that Mary and I have had as well is in a lot of cases the concern we've heard from members of the public is sometimes the process and effort that goes into an application does not justify the outcome that comes out of it. So certainly I appreciate your point about trying to identify and remove barriers in the process. So thank you for that, Rory.
You're welcome.
So I'll just kind of touch on the secondary grant as well. I kind of agree with Carl that a higher incentive, 75 even may incentivize it a little bit more for secondary suites. But what I'm not seeing in any of the potential suites is for new or renovated units in general. So I know this one specifically is secondary suites in private homes, but where's the grant incentive for the commercial property owners who are looking to renovate their secondary or third levels? I'm not seeing that, or to create them up there if they aren't there already. I think that will help with building the stock, specifically in downtown where we want to intensify, but also to help with the ones that are kind of underutilized and that need a lot of renovation in our downtown. We know we do have a number of units specifically in that. So I don't know if there's an opportunity to add that or kind of rejig the secondary grant to include any new or renovated suites or units, however we want to phrase that.
Yep. I like the suggestion, Julia, and I think we can kind of navigate precisely how it's going to land ultimately in the community improvement plan as a program. My kind of initial thought is we can do a second unit grant program A and a program B, with one of them focused at homeowner audience and the other one focused to the commercial property owner looking to provide a residential unit above. And then the municipality has the flexibility of activating or deactivating either of those financial incentives when it would like. So yes, definitely we could create that. It's
Would it
quite
not get
simple.
awful messy? What's a renovation? Is that a coat of paint? And what we like, it gets very quantified by when somebody renovates their unit. Do they have to prove that they spent 30,000 to renovate it to get the 5,000? I just a coat of paint and some new click flooring at 99 cents a square foot doesn't constitute a renovation. That gives the CIP committee a lot of too much leeway almost. We need to be able to quantify that, I guess.
Yeah, and I think within the guidelines of that specific grant program, we could outline what is a renovation. Sometimes it is lipstick that needs to be done in order to get those units painted or to get them rented and livable and usable again. So I think, defining what the criteria is and putting maybe a cap depending on what the scope of the renovation is. Maybe it's a tiered system. If it's, purely cosmetic, then you're only getting $2,000. If it's more of building renovations and having to do plumbing and electrical and energy efficiency and windows and those types of things, then maybe the grant is a little bit more. We know that building costs are expensive. So it's just trying to incentivize property owners to create livable units in our community. Gravenhurst is a good opportunity. We redid the CIP in Gravenhurst and we did units for renovations as well as new builds, and it was a really successful program. And we've seen a number of downtown commercial units be renovated or created as part of that program.
I hate to use the word slumlords, but I don't want to do all of their renovations for them. I want them to contribute also. So that's we've used that word in the past, and I'm not a fan of it. And so I want to make sure people have some skin in the game also. The landlords, I'm saying, sorry, the landlords.
No, absolutely. And that would be this would incentivize them to put their own money in, because we're not funding the renovation completely. We'd only be funding a portion of the renovation. So the CIP is the attainable CIP that's intended to be townwide.
That's correct. Yeah.
And so I'm wondering, with the downtown waterfront revitalization, we have the residential permit fee and reduction program. I'm just wondering.
Sorry, Julie, I had comments on the affordable housing before we jump to downtown waterfront.
It kind of, it goes in with
Okay.
the affordable housing.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if, because the attainable housing is town-wide, I'm wondering if that could just be shifted up into attainable housing rather than it being specifically in the downtown waterfront revitalization, because that would encompass the downtown and waterfront area as well. Just a comment on that. And also some of the recommendations, development charges, building permits, TAC increment financing, it says offers coverage of partial to 100%. I think we really need to pick a number there rather than having partial to 100%. Tax increment financing in the town has been challenging. We've noticed that with some of our CIP applications going through, and the expanse of 10 years I think is really long. So my suggestion for that would be to, shrink that down to a 5-year period and it have a decreasing increment each year. So, it's 90% 5, 80% for year 4, 30% for year, it's a smaller increment, and it's very specifically set out rather than us having to do a lot of calculations. I know Janet can kind of attest to this, that there's a lot of calculations involved and it gets very convoluted at the committee level to try and figure out what we should offer as part of that.
Did you want to offer an explanation on the partial to the 100% concept, Amy, or did you want me to cover that?
No, you can go ahead.
Okay, so I appreciate, Julia, that you actually pointed that out. It gives me an opportunity to offer an early explanation to the committee before we get into more of the details of the CIP itself. So what we are actually intending to say there is that if someone comes forward and says, well, we're going to build a 20-unit development, but I'm only going to give you 2 units affordable, will you prorate my tax increment financing? I think the answer back is yes, we're happy to prorate it. And so the partial to 100 gives us the ability to prorate it. So, if they said, for a simple example, I'm going to build this building and I'm going to do all of them, all 20 units are going to be affordable, then you get prorated at 100. So you get the full benefit because you did exactly what we wanted you to do. But if that other person came forward and said, well, I'm going to do 20 units, but 2 of them are only going to be affordable, well, that's only 10% of the units. So we're going to prorate your tax increment to the 10%. And so they don't get the full benefit because they didn't give us the full thing affordable, but they get something for, playing ball. And that's really what that is. It's a mechanism to prorate based on the number of units they actually provided.
Sorry, I just want to jump in for a second because this was one of my comments as well. The TIF funding, that's often the issue that we run into with the TIG funding, which is our program for under the current CIP policy. And the struggle that we seem to have with the current policy is that it does speak to percentages. So, I absolutely agree with your rationale, Rory, is that we should be able to identify a threshold that is equal to the development that's the ultimate product at the end of it. We shouldn't give 100% if we're only getting 2 units per se. So what we've struggled with is that it's often up to 100%, and we're working with percentages from the way it's alluded to within current CIP policy. And the only threshold dollar amount we can use is the construction costs. So where construction costs are, say, astronomical for a word, and that doesn't seem feasibly achievable over a 10-year period, then the committee has in the past wanted to use a maximum funding threshold as a dollar amount instead of as a percentage. In the past, the current policy doesn't offer that type of flexibility. So what would be, where I agree with the program wholeheartedly, what would be helpful is giving the committee and council flexibility to identify a specific funding threshold instead of relying on percentages.
And I think one thing that will help is when we do the financial analysis, we show a series of calculations. Those calculations also can serve as very helpful worksheets for staff when implementing the program. And so in respect of your feedback, Mary, I think we have a way of helping out for sure.
Perfect. And just to speak to my other two things, they were actually relatively quick. So the first one, the development charges rebate, it just has that over 10 years. Development charges are only applied once. So I just want to make sure that that's speaking to the duration of the CIP policy itself. But two, I guess I don't really understand the accessibility top-up grant. Like I understand the purpose of it, but maybe it's because I'm getting stuck on the phrasing of top up. It sounds like you're just giving them a little bit extra to incentivize accessibility improvements. Am I understanding that correctly? Okay.
Yeah.
Is there a number that we have in mind? And I'm just wondering too, why is it only for affordable or attainable housing? Is that not something that we could do for the secondary grant unit as well? Because I think we want to encourage the majority of our houses to be accessible as well as, you know, our businesses.
Yep. Today is about being open to a wide variety of ideas. So, we're happy to receive that feedback, Julia, and then look at how we can make accessibility as a financial incentive a little bit more universal in the CIP. The way that it was originally set out here is that there's within the bigger picture of attainable or affordable housing, there's a subcomponent, which is affordable housing that is also barrier free. And that's like the hardest of all the housing for those to access. So, anything that we can do to actually unlock some more potential in that specific niche, is only, for the broader betterment of society. But universal design is good everywhere. So, let's encourage it.
Okay, let's move on.
I'm wondering if we essentially did downtown and waterfront revitalization as well in that process. But just in case, we have 3 programs recommended for the downtown and waterfront revitalization incentives. I also want to mention that from what we had learned in the polls, there may be an opportunity to expand the boundary. So it wouldn't necessarily just be downtown and waterfront, but just to keep along the same terminology that we've been using, downtown and waterfront revitalization, but ultimately it would be community revitalization, Smith Falls revitalization. So we have one, it's building on the existing facade improvement program, the residential permit and fee reduction program, and then another tax increment program. Does anybody have any questions? Julia.
So I think I would support an expanded area to expand throughout the entire town. We do have commercial nodes right now that do need improvement, and we're pushing through our zoning bylaw and official plan to expand other areas. So, as we grow, it will give the ability for commercial property owners in those other areas to take advantage of incentives. And I'm just wondering, and I know that Herb had kind of mentioned this before, we're missing that building improvement grant where it provides an opportunity to renovate the interior of the buildings, specifically for major building and construction, but it also could support accessibility and energy efficiency improvements specifically. And for the landscaping, I know that there was a lot of discussion and comments related to landscaping and having, planters outside and those types of things. I didn't see this really captured. That may be under the facade improvement program, but I think taking that out and just having a landscaping grant specifically, because the facade items, from what the comments are, is facade. We want to stay with the building. We don't want that to come off. But where landscaping can be fairly portable. So looking at planters and planter boxes and beautifying using greenery, I think if we take that out, it will help separate the two and can also help incentivize beautifying our patios as well. If we include some patio renovations or landscaping and greenery on patios as part of a landscaping program.
It's good. It's a good idea.
Any other questions? I see Carl and Chris popped up on my screen. Did you guys have anything you wanted to add? No? Okay.
Cool. Just a quick point with respect to residential permit and fee reduction program. And in this case, am I correct in assuming that would be roughly equivalent to the building permit, zoning, or site plan application reductions that we have in place right now? We don't have a development permit system in Smith Falls, but we have a program that offers rebates on zoning, site plan, or building permit fees.
Yeah, anything that essentially is tied to the concept of a development approval. You know, that kind of basic philosophy of you have to get development permission before you can build. The suggested here is to offer 100% rebate. So that would cut across site plan approval, building permitting. You know, we could. This is the emergent recommendation, and then as we do the CIP, we can spell out specifically which particular applications are going to get the full rebate.
Great, thank you.
Chris, did you have anything to add, Chris?
Yeah, just I wanted to comment on, I think it would be helpful if in the introduction we had a really good definition of what the problems are we're trying to solve. To me, the problems we're trying to solve are housing insecurity, issues identified in our downtown and waterfront revitalization plan that I think are still ongoing, underdeveloped brownfield sites that are spotted across town, and improving accessibility to both in new builds and in existing buildings. And I think we need to dive more into that to make these solutions a little more clear. But when it comes to 4.2 downtown and waterfront revitalization, I do not want to see the boundary expanded because it's a downtown and waterfront revitalization solution. And I don't see the same problems outside of the downtown core that we see in the downtown core. So I don't think using the same solutions outside of the downtown core, I don't even know, I don't know what the problems are outside of the downtown core, but just to expand the boundary as a matter of fairness, it's not going to solve our problem. It's just going to subsidize the kind of development that's already happening anyway. So I think that boundary is going to have to really be carefully considered. And that was just a comment I wanted to bring up in relation to this. I don't know, I'm having unstable internet, so I hope that got through.
It did. Thanks, Chris. Mary, you had your hand up.
Yes, I did. So sorry, I got a little off taken there. I will publicly say that, Chris, I absolutely agree with you. So one thing I will mention is that TIF funding for the downtown and waterfront area, I don't personally agree with. A lot of what we would look for TIF funding in the downtown would be brownfield developments, affordable housing, things that are essentially above and beyond. And that's ultimately what we look for in terms of our current TIF funding applications. So I would say that, especially if something like the attainable housing and or brownfield is open to the entire boundary of Smith Falls, that it would make TIF funding available in the downtown. Maybe not redundant, I wouldn't say that, but essentially we would be looking for the same things out of the application. So it doesn't provide the additional above and beyond. But one thing I will say, and I see kind of a trend here, is I have been in a lot of the residential units in the downtown area, and many of them are dilapidated or falling apart, unfortunately, because of the lack of ability to afford maintenance improvements. And our current program too, which is that building improvement program that Julia was speaking to, really does fund that interior improvements and speaks to building maintenance and building stock viability. And I do think that that's something that should be retained throughout this update.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
Irv, have I ever mentioned I don't agree with program 2 whatsoever? I think I might have said that the odd time. We do not fund, we fund what the public sees. I do not agree with Chris and Mary on the fact that we should be supporting interior fit ups. I do not agree with that at all. And I also agree with expanding the boundaries. I, as a taxpayer in the whole town of Smith Falls, contribute just to the downtown core. I don't agree with that. If somebody wants to spend money in a residential area and wants to create affordable housing, hats off to them. Let's get her done.
Okay, Rory, you can see there that there's quite a difference of opinion as to what we should include and shouldn't include, especially in program 2. So that's really caused us some issues in the past, and we really need council to set specific policy as to what we're going to and not going to do. And I'm just going to throw something into the pot here also. The Heritage Committee is looking at a heritage district downtown. I don't know if that's going to be accepted or not accepted and how we're going to move forward with that. And I'm just wondering whether improvements to a historic building, whether we just should be looking at kind of the icing on the cake or whether we should be looking at the cake. So you've got here costs up to $15,000 in facade improvements or 50% of that. An additional $2,500 grant may be given to applicants that include the restoration of heritage features. In some of our discussions, we focused on the heritage features, and I can see Chris has something to say there. We focused on the additional heritage features. So do we focus on the painting of the building, or do we focus on the stained glass that should be going back into the windows in the building? And we've had difficulties trying to sort that out amongst the committee, and we need clear policy from council or in this report accepted by council as to which way we're going to go. Before I go to Rory, I see you've got your hand up, but I'm going to go to Chris first because he might have a different perspective on this. Chris?
Thanks, Irv. Yeah, first I'll just clarify. I think accessibility, brownfields, and affordable housing, the boundary should be the boundary of the municipality. Those are municipal-wide problems. But when it comes to facade improvements and it comes to program 2, the interior renovations, there's still an occupancy problem in the downtown core, and you can see it when you're walking around with the vacancy rates. So that's where I put the smaller boundary on this one. I think you bring up a really important point on heritage, where the way this is worded in the recommended provision right now, it definitely doesn't do it for me. I'd like to know what the Heritage Committee would think of it, but I think these facade improvements, they're about architecture and they're about design, and heritage often becomes a synonym for architecture and design, but that's really all it is. When we look at these heritage designations, the word heritage can put forward, we think old, but that's not really it. You could have a heritage designated building that's 10 years old, that you can recognize that because of the architectural features of this building and the context in the community, in 100 years time, in 200 years time, in 500 years time, that's still going to be an important building in the community, and therefore you want to protect it. So I don't think that this is something that should be bonused. I think that this is something that needs to be intrinsic in every single application we get. And it's something that we really need to start to clarify what we expect and set clear expectations on the part of the property owner or the business owner when they're coming and making these applications. So it takes out a lot of the gray area that we've been struggling with over the last few years. But I think every single building that already exists has some kind of architecture. There's an architectural context of the downtown core, and these are the things that need to be articulated in this. And I don't think it should be like a $2,500 bonus on a $15,000 grant isn't enough to stimulate the kind of improvements that I think we need downtown.
Okay, Rory, I'm going to pass it back to you, please.
I just have some things I'm happy to share with the committee at this opportune time. So there has been a conversation about, moving a boundary, and I'll simply share back something that I'm very tuned into is the concept of where we draw the line on something. Because once you establish a line, it means that somebody is in and someone is out. And because we are providing an opportunity to gather a financial incentive for doing something that's good, there has to be like a public interest that's served in the kind of decision of where that line does get laid down. So I actually I like that the conversation has come forward this early in the formation of this CIP process. It gives us an ability to kind of think more thoroughly and maybe bring to you some of our professional advice as it relates to this concept of who's in and who's out. The other thing that I'll share back is one of the things that I know, having worked with downtown merchants, is that there is a difference between a downtown merchant who owns the building and operates a storefront and values the renter upstairs, who provides a little bit of an incremental income to the property owner, who happens to be the store owner, the property owner and the store operator, versus what I'd call an absentee landlord, who happens to own the building and they rent it out to the business operator and they rent it out to a renter. Those two types of property owners have slightly different interests. And there's always been a desire to serve the owner of the property who is also the operator of the business, because it supports kind of the overall kind of viability of the operation. And so that's something that, again, through my years of experience, I'm tuned into, and I hope to kind of have an offline conversation a little bit more with staff about the dynamics of ownership in the downtown. And again, you've heard me say, we want to calibrate this for Smiths Falls' unique circumstances, and that'll assist us in getting that right for this community.
Okay, Julia.
I just wanted to kind of touch back on my comment for expansion of the commercial component. The downtown core is in the core, and we have so many roadways that come into our community. And when people are coming from those other communities into our community, they're going past those commercial areas that are in need of repair. So Union Street is a really good example, Lombard Street, and as well as, the Brockville Street mini mall as well. So there could be some other specific areas that could be incorporated into the CIP. It doesn't necessarily have to be a blanket area, but I think there are some commercial nodes within our community that do need some help. And like Chris had said, everyone within the community are paying taxes. So I think we need to have an opportunity to broaden that. And as we grow as a community, and as commercial expands, we need to have something in place in policy that allows us to support those businesses outside the downtown core. And we've provided the downtown businesses and property owners for a number of years with these incentives. So I think we need to kind of expand that to help beautify the rest of our town, especially on our main arterial thoroughways into town.
Okay, thank you. Rory, I'm just going to add one more thing, and that is, I think in our first 2 years, because we were meeting face to face, we tended to iron out a lot of the issues, and Chris Samir brought this up earlier. We tended to iron out those issues, but then once we got into Zoom and COVID, we started to have issues with discussions and a variety of perspectives around the table. And I liked the variety of perspectives around the table when we were meeting face to face, but without the council that approved the current CIP, they gave us a lot of latitude. The problem was when we were on Zoom, that latitude just brought up confrontation between the committee members because we had a wide variety of perspectives. So somehow the policy is very important, that it can't be too forgiving and too wide. It has to narrow the committee's thoughts, and within that narrowing, we can express our perspectives, but it can't be too wide. It's got to be really focused. That policy is so important, I think.
Fair point. We're just going through that right now, and Tecumseh down by Windsor, they're looking to get something very specific to happen, and we just had a conversation about how strict we want those eligibility criteria to be. So this is very much front and center in our brains right now.
Okay, thank you. I'll hand it back to you. Or to Amy.
Amy?
Sounds good. So I believe that's the last one is Brownfield development incentives. So there are 4 programs for this one, and then we can get into the municipal leadership strategy. So for the Brownfield development incentives, there are environmental site assessment grant program, another tax increment equivalent financing type, a building permit fees grant, and a development charge deferral program.
I think they're good. They're pretty standard in terms of brownfield development incentives that I've seen in other communities. Just kind of my same comments along the tax increment is, reducing it to 5 years and having, a specific number or monetary threshold, as Mary had kind of pointed out, to make the calculations easier. As well as the building permit fees. Again, is that just building permit fees, or is that all planning fees?
That one's currently set out as a building permit fee. Typically, that's the bigger chunk of change. There's no concern whatsoever if we wish to include planning fees as part of the incentive package. Certainly possible to do that. And then the question is if you'd like to offer a rebate of 50% or 100% of planning fees or some other proportion. I think there's a lot of comfort across many municipalities to offer that as a brownfield incentive too. So possible for Smiths Falls.
Thank you. Chris McGuire.
Thanks, sir. Yeah, I agree on this one. I think I don't really understand the 50%, and I don't understand why box it in so much. I think with brownfields, it can be huge costs. And say if the development charges are, I don't know, the development charges came to $100,000, but the brownfield rehabilitation was going to be $800,000. 100% might be a reasonable amount. So I was just trying to get a better understanding of that, and definitely, I think building permit fees could expand up to all the fees and make this one as flexible as possible, because these are the hardest ones to get redeveloped. And I guess just as long as it's coming out of future revenues or revenues like development charges or the tax increment grants, then it's not like we're taking a current hit in the budget, and it's coming off future revenues. So that's what, I don't know, that's my preference there.
Yeah, for the benefit of the committee's understanding, for something like a building permit fee or a planning application fee, if you grant that money back or rebate that money back, then that's lost revenue to the municipality. That revenue is designed to cover the cost of your building officials and your other building department staff and your work of your planning department staff. To make such of those programs available, typically what a municipality does is that it creates a reserve fund, and then from the general levy, it puts money into the reserve fund on the presumption that it's going to be giving out those grants, so that it isn't financially upside down as it relates to the need to fund these various aspects of its departmental function. It's slightly different than tax increment equivalent, because you're essentially choosing to forego revenue for a period of time with the expectation that that development is going to be there for many, many more years, and you'll be able to collect taxes off it for a much longer period. So slightly different perspective on how the money works, and certainly always happy to share those aspects early on and have further conversations when we do some of the financial work, because I think that really helps paint some of the pictures numerically as it relates to how these different types of incentives work together when we model them on like a case study.
Okay, Chris, you've got another question?
Thanks, sir. Yeah, so when it comes to something like the building permit reserve in a municipality like Smiths Falls, where we have a very healthy reserve, my understanding is we can't use those funds to give a building permit fee grant. But if we were to give 100% rebate on the cost of the building permit fees, that would that make it a de facto coming out of the reserves when you take into account the revenue never made it to the building permit account?
It would be a separate reserve fund that you would specifically call your CIP reserve. And from there, that pot of money would feed any of the programs that are a rebate or grant type program that we would bring forward in the ultimate CIP. A different purse. You'd need a different purse of money.
So no
to
matter
do
what, we
all
have
these.
to.
Okay, Janet, as the treasurer, do you have any questions or issues regarding this?
We currently, that was a discussion that we had a few building permits in the last CIP, and there was talk of taking that out of the reserve, but council had not made that decision. So from what I'm understanding from this, it would be a reserve, which we have a CIP reserve, and it would continue to come from that as opposed to the building reserve, which is what Roy is explaining now.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Amy?
Good. So we come to the last piece, which is the municipal leadership strategy. And so, as I said before, it's town-led initiatives for the public realm, essentially. So sidewalks, lighting that isn't on a private building, the streets themselves, and public spaces. And so the list that I have here were based on everything we had learned from engagement from our review of town policies. And of course, this list is not exhaustive. It's not rigid. It can expand. It can be reduced. And then when the CIP is actually drafted, it will be prioritized based on these above. So public realm and connectivity, the ability to implement and its timeline, potential costs and tangible benefits to the community. So on that note, does anybody have any comments or points of concern about what we have listed here?
Julia? And then Chris.
I just wanted to note that our department is currently undertaking a public arts master plan for the entire town. So, the installation of public art will be part of that plan. But I think we talked about it before, where having the facade improvements include things like public art. So to get a muralist, it would pay for a portion of the muralist in order to install public art on a commercial building.
Yeah, I remember us actually talking about that. So when I wrote install public art, that was the line of thought that I had, but I'll rephrase it.
Okay, Chris?
Thanks, sir. As the good clarification on the public art, the accessibility improvements, I prefer to see that one reworded. I think there's nothing wrong with the sentence, but it's outside of the context of what the CIP is. A CIP is meant to do, where public infrastructure like crosswalks, curb cuts, all these tactile indicators are something the municipality needs to do. And I think with the accessibility committee's work plan and those kind of things, it's outside of the scope of this, but we do need accessibility improvements in businesses. And sometimes those are going to need to work with the municipality. Say, for example, if they're going to take up sidewalk space. For example, if the steps of the Rideau Hotel can take up half the sidewalk and it's great, why couldn't another business use part of the sidewalk for a ramp? That's more what I think that a leadership strategy associated with this CIP would need to do, than just because other groups I think are covering the public stuff right now.
Okay, Carl?
Thanks, Irv. So I like this, and actually I'm really happy to see that a handful of these were either underway or close to completion. We're close with a new sign bylaw. We are in the process of updating our zoning bylaw, which includes we're looking to simplify parking requirements downtown. But as far as parking goes, a lot of the challenges that we're seeing, especially as it impacts development viability downtown, is a question of supply. And we have undertaken a parking study a few years ago, and one of the things that we're urged to look at is, well, what's an appropriate rate for cash in lieu of parking, but also do we look at creating municipal parking lots or developing the infrastructure. So certainly within the zoning, we're focusing on off-street parking, but we're not zoning, we're not focusing on municipal assets like our streets or any lots. But that's the challenge that we're seeing, especially with folks who live in who are renting existing residential units downtown that may not have parking, and they're not new units, so we can't require parking through zoning. But perhaps sort of reorienting or refocusing that particular strategy in terms of supporting the creation of or expansion of municipal parking lots where tenants have spaces where they can rent close to where they live.
Yeah, I want to add to that. I think it would be worth chatting about this offline, because when it came to adding that point of reviewing parking requirements, it was more towards the attainable housing piece, where people who are living, who require attainable housing don't necessarily have a car. And so in terms of making the building cost effective for those who don't even drive, I think that was the main point that they were trying to take home. But there does need to be a balance, because there are people who do still need parking. And if the supply is limited, then that's another conversation to be had as well.
Oh, absolutely. And I think our clerk's office is constantly, we're hearing often from folks who are getting ticketed because they have nowhere else to park, and that's where they live. So it is most of the operational challenges we have downtown, from what I understand, are residential parking requirements. So we could definitely have a chat about this and how we can support, I guess, what we want to achieve in the long run here.
Okay, any other comments on this section? I'm just going to ask a question, Amy. Create a set of urban design guidelines for the town, particularly the downtown. We've already got downtown guidelines. Are you thinking a total rewrite, or just bringing them up to speed a little bit, or what were your thoughts?
The latter. I think the choice of wording was wrong, and we can fix that up, but tweaking them essentially. Yeah, revisiting them, if you will.
Okay, thank you. Okay, do we want to go to the conclusion?
We can. I think the conclusion is essentially saying the work that we have done to date, and moving on to the next steps, which is taking this feedback, beginning to shape the draft CIP based on everything we've learned from you and from the public, and as well, given the conversations that we've had today, having some chats offline with Mary and Carl and Julia, just to make sure we're all on the same page in terms of how we're going to move forward with some of these financial incentive programs. And again, these were very preliminary, and we're very grateful to have had this conversation with you, because we've learned quite a bit from this chat that we will take home with us and incorporate it into the CIP. So, Rory, do you have anything you'd like to add?
No, I couldn't have said it better myself, Amy.
Okay, thank you. Anyone from the committee have anything to add? I have a couple of things I was going to bring up. I'm going to go back to funding here, because the CIP for downtown, we get about $50,000 a year, and sometimes we have funding from a past year come forward. But every time I turn around in this report, like we've got a CIP for downtown, we've got an affordable housing CIP coming up, and every portion seems to have funds associated with it. And I'm just wondering, I'm going to ask this question of Chris McGuire. Does this worry you with the number of different funding components in this strategy coming forward as a council member? I know I've thrown that out from left field here, Chris, but you know, when I read through it, and I'm not even on council, but it was like, wow, this looks like a lot of money for the town of Smiths Falls. And I'm just wondering what your perspective on that is.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, especially when it comes to tax increment grants, anything that's going to be projected over a future revenue period, right? If we take a hit on a development charge today, that means that reserve is going to be underfunded in the future, or the tax rates aren't going to go up the same way. And I still, I think one of the biggest challenges when we have reviewed those projects in the past is trying to understand the value created from the development and what that adds, what the return on that investment is, and what a reasonable number is. And I'm hoping as you guys go back and keep working on this, that we can get a little bit more meat in that area, because it's going to be really hard, I think, to make these decisions still with the information presented tonight. And I think we need more there. Also, best practices, right? It's one thing to look at what neighboring communities are doing, but it'd be really interesting to understand what municipalities have really leveraged this and really have success stories, and what kind of numbers did they use, and how did it roll out? Because it's not a new tool anymore, and that's something I don't fully understand.
Especially when we're still working on 2016 numbers for assessments. It's just, we're insane. We have no idea what our true tax rates are in the town of Smiths Falls. And that's no fault of you, Janet, by any means. Don't take that as an insult by any means. That's MPAC and only MPAC. So.
Okay, I've got one more component here, and that is, if we have limited funds that we can spend, is it better to split it into small projects, which we have done in the past, a lot of signage and so on, and small improvements, or to keep it for, let's say, 2 large projects, and basically that's all we can do because we have limited funds? Is it better to go one way or the other, or it's a combination of both of those? I'll just throw that out to either Amy or Rory.
I'm happy to help answer that. So one of the things that we have recommended in the last little while is to deal with your community improvement applications through 2 intake windows, one around springtime and another one around fall. And what that does is, instead of you having to make ad hoc decisions, then you kind of collect up a series of applications and you say, okay, this is the group of them before us. The other thing that we try to do in the CIP is we try to kind of give you an ability to, through policy, set some priorities. And then you can say, well, this one probably not as much as a priority based on our plan. This one more so of a priority. We're going to advance this application and we're going to set this other one aside. As you then move through to a fall intake, depending on the status of funding, you may choose to bring something forward and say, you know what, we do have funding available. We're going to advance another application or 2. So I think that gives you the ability to weigh a group of them and provide a fair assessment. And then as part of that dialogue, the questions of big versus small can be introduced into that conversation too. And I also, again, a bookmark for the future is, let's save a conversation about the difference between tax increment versus, straight up grant or rebate, because they have slightly different implications as it relates to how the municipality handles the finances, and we'll have an opportunity to speak more about that in the weeks ahead.
Okay, thank you. Julia?
Roy, just refresh my memory. Will Dylan be providing an evaluation form for future committees to use to do the evaluation when the intakes happen?
Pretty much, I'd say, like, we will, through the course of the dialogues, we'll have with you get a sense as to priorities. So we'll, write some priority into policy, and the ability to kind of set out the evaluation criteria in something that's like a checklist or a form. Julia is, incremental. We'll just build it right in.
Okay, perfect. Any other questions or comments from the committee? Okay, Rory, Amy, and Megan, I'd like to thank the three of you for joining us today. That was a great discussion. And we're looking forward to the next steps and maybe seeing a revised report coming back to us at some point to take a look at and the final guidelines for sure. So thank you very much for joining us. We as a committee appreciate that very much. Thank you. Thank you
very much. Have a great night, everyone.
You too.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Okay. We'll finish off the rest of the agenda here. So roundtable. I'm going to start with Karen. Anything to add or throw on the table here for our committee?
No, I'm good. I thought that was
Okay.
a great presentation, though.
It was good. Janet, anything to bring up today? No? Okay. Carl?
No, I'm glad it was a great conversation and lots of stuff for us to work on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Dorothy, anything you'd like to mention?
No, nothing for me. Thank you.
Okay. Mary?
I'll just say that, Dorothy, you were fairly quiet during the HCD conversation. I thought you would have spoke up about whether or not it's the heritage attributes portion of the discussion. But ultimately, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that. I'm combining feedback to go to the consultants tomorrow morning. So if you have additional feedback you'd like to provide me in writing, I'd be happy to incorporate it.
Okay, thank you. So I see we've lost Julia and the two Chris's, so I'm going to call it a night here. We'll adjourn at 5:27 tonight. Thank you very much for everyone for joining us, and that was a good discussion today.